My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 38 years old. 7 months ago, I stood in the banquet room of the Harbor View Grill while my father, in front of 112 people, called me a failure. He didn't use that word. He used quieter ones. But the people in that room understood exactly what he meant, and so did I. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that 4 days earlier I had signed the largest client contract of my career. A 2-year consulting engagement worth $1.8 million. The client was Raymond Schultz, the man sitting in the front row of that banquet room, the man who had just been named to replace my father as Regional Director of Operations at Callaway Industrial Supply, the company my father had spent 31 years building his identity around. Raymond Schultz had signed with me, not with my father's firm, not with anyone my father had recommended. With me, specifically, after 6 months of conversations my father knew nothing about. Before I tell you what happened when my father finished his speech and Raymond stood up, please like and subscribe. But only if this is resonating with you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love this community. Let me take you back to where this started. Growing up in Akron, Ohio, I was the daughter of a man who had made himself from nothing and never fully forgave the people around him for not doing the same fast enough. My family. Dad, Gerald Calloway, 64, 31 years in industrial supply distribution. He'd started as a warehouse floor manager at 23 and worked his way into the regional director chair through a combination of genuine competence and a total inability to accept any outcome that wasn't his preferred one. He was impressive in the way that could make you forget, for stretches, what it cost to be close to him. Mom. Patricia, who had spent 40 years being married to Gerald and had developed the particular grace of someone who has learned which hills are worth the climb. She saw me clearly. She was careful about saying so too loudly. My brother Kevin, 5 years older in commercial lending, lives in Columbus. Kevin had learned early to exist at a safe orbital distance from our father and had built a pleasant life in that orbit. I understood him. I'd tried to do the same thing for years. Me, the one who had decided at 26 to go into business consulting. The one who had specifically not gone into the family business. The one who had, in my father's telling, taken everything he'd tried to teach her and pointed it somewhere he couldn't evaluate. He'd never said he was proud of me. Not once. Not in 38 years. The pattern started early enough that I'm not sure I can identify its beginning. It was less a pattern than a climate. When I was 19, I was awarded a merit scholarship for my second year at Ohio State, $12,000, competitive, based on academic performance and a project proposal I'd spent 3 weeks developing. I called home. My father said, "Good, don't let your grades slip or you'll lose it." My mother, who had picked up the extension, said, "We're so proud of you, honey." My father did not echo her. When I was 25, I was promoted to senior analyst at the consulting firm where I'd started as an associate, 2 years ahead of the standard track, with a $19,000 salary increase. I drove to Akron to tell them in person. My father asked who my supervisor was, whether he had industry experience, and whether the firm had any real presence outside of Ohio. He did not say congratulations. Kevin called me that night. "You know he's proud of you," Kevin said. "He just can't say it." "That's not the same thing," I told Kevin. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." When I was 31, I launched my own consultancy, Operations and Supply Chain Strategy, a natural extension of what I'd been doing for other firms for 6 years. It was terrifying and right in the way that a decision feels when you've been slowly arriving at it for a long time. I told my father over dinner at their house. I walked him through the business case. Existing client relationships I was converting, a 6-month runway funded by savings, a specific niche in industrial distribution consulting that I'd identified because I knew, from growing up in his house, from watching him talk about his work for 30 years, exactly where those businesses struggled. He listened. He ate his pot roast. Then he said, "You know, most consulting businesses fail in the first 2 years." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know the statistics, Dad." "I'm just saying, it's a risk. Kevin's got a good stable situation in Columbus. There's nothing wrong with stable." My mother refilled everyone's water and changed the subject. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the wheel and told myself that his doubt was his problem and that I was going to build something he couldn't argue with. I spent 6 years doing exactly that. By the time my father's retirement was announced, my consultancy, Callaway Operations Group, a name I'd chosen partly out of stubbornness and partly because it was accurate, had 12 active client relationships, a team of 4, and annual revenue just under $900,000. We had worked with 9 companies in industrial distribution and supply chain, 3 of them direct competitors to businesses my father had partnered with over his career. He knew my revenue approximately. He did not know my client list in detail. I had never shared it fully because the conversations always landed the same way, a series of qualifications and comparisons that left me feeling smaller than when I'd started. My father's retirement party was scheduled for a Saturday in April. 112 guests, company colleagues, industry contacts, family friends, extended family. The Harborview Grill, private banquet room, open bar, a slideshow someone had spent real time making. My mother had coordinated everything and executed it beautifully. 6 months before the party, I had been approached by a business development contact about a potential engagement with Callaway Industrial's incoming regional director. The outgoing director, my father, was retiring. The board had named Raymond Schultz, a 52-year-old operations executive who had spent 15 years at a firm in Cleveland, to step into the role. Raymond had reached out through a mutual contact because he was coming into a new company and a new region and wanted strategic support on the transition. Supply chain restructuring, vendor relationship mapping, a 12-month operations review. The kind of engagement I had built my firm to do. We had 3 conversations over 6 weeks before I understood fully who he was. I knew the company name. I had been deliberately not paying close attention to the specifics of my father's succession because I had a firm rule about not letting my family relationships shape my business decisions in either direction. When I understood that Raymond Schultz was replacing my father, I sat with that for a full day. Then I called my attorney and asked her to look over the conflict of interest considerations. She came back the next morning. No legal conflict. I was not employed by my father. I had no formal relationship with Callaway Industrial. Raymond was an independent executive making his own business decisions. I called Raymond and disclosed everything: my last name, the relationship, the full picture. I told him he should know before we went any further. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does that change the quality of your work?" "No," I said. "Then it doesn't change mine," he said. "Frankly, someone who grew up watching that company from the inside might be exactly what I need." We signed the engagement 4 days before the retirement party. The contract value was $1.8 million over 24 months, the largest single engagement in my firm's history. I told no one. I went to my father's retirement party as his daughter, in the dress my mother had asked me to wear, carrying the fruit tart I'd made from a recipe his mother left me. Raymond Schultz was already in the room when I arrived. I'd met him twice in person during our conversations. We exchanged a brief, professional nod across the room and went back to our separate orbits, him working the industry tables, me finding my mother near the centerpieces. "You look beautiful," my mother said, and hugged me in the way that meant she knew something was in the air, even if she didn't know what. "How's he doing?" I asked. "Nervous," she said. "Don't tell him I said so." The dinner moved well. The slideshow was genuinely lovely. 31 years of a man who had built something real, and the images showed it. I watched my father in the front row watching himself and saw, for a moment, something unguarded on his face. Pride. Relief, maybe. The specific emotion of a person at the end of a long effort. I wanted to feel uncomplicated warmth toward him. I mostly managed it. Then came the speeches. His colleagues spoke first. 3 men who had worked with him for decades and clearly meant everything they said. My mother spoke. She was funny and warm and precise, and the room laughed in the right places and went quiet in the right places, and I watched my father reach over and hold her hand. Then my father stood up. He spoke for about 12 minutes. He talked about the company, the industry, the region. He talked about the team. He talked about Raymond, warmly, specifically, as the right man to carry things forward. He talked about Kevin. He said Kevin had the steady head of a man who makes smart choices. Kevin, seated 2 tables away, gave me an uncomfortable look. Then he talked about me. He said, and I want to be exact because I've thought about this many times. He said, "My daughter Diane has always done things her own way. I respect that. It hasn't always looked like success from where I'm standing, but she's persistent, and I suppose that counts for something in the consulting business." He paused. "I just hope someday she builds something she can really be proud of." I just hope someday she builds something she can really be proud of. 112 people heard my father say at his retirement party that I had not yet built something worth being proud of. I sat very still. I kept my face arranged. My mother's hand found my arm under the table and pressed once, firmly, the way she communicated things she couldn't say out loud. My father sat back down to applause. And then Raymond Schultz stood up. Raymond had not been asked to speak. He wasn't on the program. He stood up with his wine glass and waited for the room to settle, and then he said, in the easy tone of a man accustomed to being listened to, "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight, but Gerald's remarks made me feel like I should add some context." The room shifted attention. My father looked at Raymond with the expression of a man who was not sure where this was going. "I've spent the last 6 months getting ready to step into this region," Raymond said. "Part of that was finding the right strategic support, someone who could help me understand the landscape, map the relationships, build a real operational picture of what I'm walking into." He paused. 4 days ago, I signed an engagement with a consultancy here in Akron. 2 years. Comprehensive operations review, supply chain restructuring, vendor strategy. He turned and looked across the room, directly at me. "The firm is Callaway Operations Group. The principal is Diane Callaway." The room went very quiet. "I did my due diligence," Raymond continued, his voice still easy, still measured. "I looked at her client history, her methodology, her results. Her track record in industrial distribution is exceptional. 3 of her clients have reduced supply chain costs by more than 20% in the first year after engagement." He turned back toward the front of the room. "I hired the best person available for this work. She happened to be sitting in this room." He raised his glass. "Gerald, you raised someone who built exactly the kind of firm I wanted to work with. I thought you should know that publicly." He sat down. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then my Aunt Louise started clapping, and it moved through the room like something that had been waiting for permission. I did not look at my father right away. I looked at my mother, who had tears running down her face and was not trying to stop them. Kevin, 2 tables away, was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something between amazement and long overdue relief. When I finally looked at my father, he was looking at his hands. My father found me an hour later, out on the restaurant's small deck overlooking the harbor. I had needed air. He came out and stood beside me, and for a while we both looked at the water. "Raymond didn't tell me," he said, "that you were—" "I didn't know." "I know you didn't. You should have told me." I looked at him. "Would it have changed what you said?" He was quiet. "Dad, would you have said something different in that speech if you'd known about the contract?" He was quiet for longer this time. "I don't know," he finally said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever. "That's the problem," I said. "I've been building something real for 6 years and you have never once asked to understand it. Not the work, not the clients, not what I've built. You've been waiting for evidence of failure, and I have given you evidence of the opposite over and over, and you have just not received it." He turned toward me. He looked older outside, away from the party, tired in a way I hadn't let myself see before. "I don't know how to talk to you about your work," he said. "I never understood it the way I understood mine." "You never tried." "No," he said. "I didn't." I waited. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what I said tonight. I'm sorry." I had waited 38 years for an apology from my father that didn't have a qualification attached to it. It was 2 words. It was imperfect. It was the plainest thing he'd ever offered me, and I stood there on that deck and let it matter, which was the only honest response I had. "Okay," I said. I'd like to understand the work, he said. If you're willing. We can try, I told him. We went back inside. He introduced me to 3 of his colleagues before the night ended, each time saying, "This is my daughter. She runs a consulting firm." He said it without qualification. I noticed every time. 7 months later, my life looks like this. The Callaway industrial engagement is 4 months in and running exactly as projected. Raymond is a precise, demanding client who treats the work seriously and gives useful feedback, which is all I want from anyone I work with. The operations review is on schedule. The supply chain restructuring begins in Q3. My firm crossed $1.1 million in annual revenue in February, the first time we've broken 7 figures. I have 14 active clients and a team of 6. We are, by any measure my father would have accepted from anyone else, a success. He and I have dinner every 6 weeks, just the 2 of us, a habit we started in November. We talk about the work, mine and his, the decades of his that I grew up watching without fully understanding, and that I understand better now, having spent years inside the same industry from a different angle. He asks questions I didn't expect him to ask. He listens to the answers in a way he didn't, for most of my life, know how to do. We are not fixed. A man of 64 does not relearn how to see his daughter in a handful of dinners. But we are trying, and the trying is real, and I have decided to meet it honestly, rather than hold the years of distance between us like a debt he can never repay. My mother called me the week after the party. She said, "I knew you were going to do something. I didn't know what, but I knew." She paused. "You are so much like him, you know. The stubbornness, the evidence." She laughed. "Neither of you will say a thing until you can prove it." She wasn't wrong. Kevin bought me a very expensive bottle of wine and mailed it without a card. When I called to thank him, he just said, "It was 7 years coming." I didn't disagree. If you've ever spent years building something that someone important to you refused to see, if you've brought evidence and watched it get qualified, softened, deflected, I want to tell you something directly. You don't have to build it for them. You don't have to time your success to their doubt. You don't have to wait until the right audience is watching, or engineer the perfect moment, or arrange the room so they have nowhere to look but at what you've made. But if that moment comes, if the room arranges itself and the truth has somewhere to land, let it land. You don't have to say a word. You just have to have done the work. I had done the work. Raymond said so in front of 112 people, and my father, standing on a deck over the water, finally heard it in a way he hadn't before. That's not a victory. That's just what truth sounds like when it finally has enough room. If this story reached you today, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me about a moment when your work finally spoke for itself, or when someone finally saw what you'd built. I read everyone. Subscribe if you're staying. I'll keep showing up. Take care of yourselves. Build the thing. Let it speak.